2 weeks after my picture-perfect wedding, the videographer called my private office line. His voice was trembling as he said, "Ma'am, I need to show you something in person. Please come to my studio right now. Do not tell your parents and do not tell your husband. This changes everything." What he revealed on his computer screen left me absolutely speechless and started a chain of events that would destroy my entire family. My name is Sydney. I am 33 years old, working as a senior forensic accountant at a major financial corporation in downtown Chicago. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been utterly betrayed by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally. Growing up in our affluent Chicago suburb, I was always treated as the dull, analytical one. My parents, David and Brenda, ran a local logistics company and lived for social status. They constantly made me feel like I was too dry, too focused on spreadsheets, and completely lacking the charm of my younger sister, Madison. Madison was 30 years old, claiming to be a lifestyle influencer, but in reality, she just drained my parents' bank accounts to buy designer bags. When I met Cameron, a 34-year-old handsome real estate broker, my parents acted like I had won the lottery. They told everyone how incredibly lucky I was that a man like him would settle for a boring accountant. I believed them. I thought I had finally made them proud. I thought Cameron loved me for my stability. I was completely blind to the trap they had set for me. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was sitting in my corner office reviewing a complex corporate fraud case. The ringing of my phone broke my concentration. The caller ID showed it was Leo, the talented independent videographer we had hired for our wedding. I picked up expecting him to ask about background music choices or color grading for our wedding film. Instead, he sounded panicked. He told me to drop whatever I was doing and drive to his studio immediately. As an auditor, my brain is trained to look for discrepancies to notice when the numbers do not add up. Leo's tone was a massive red flag. He refused to send me anything over email, insisting it was too sensitive. I left my office building and walked to the parking garage, my mind racing through all the logical possibilities. Did an audio mic pick up someone gossiping? Did a groomsman do something embarrassing? I navigated through the heavy Chicago traffic, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My analytical mind tried to categorize and dismiss the anxiety, but a cold dread was already settling in my stomach. The wedding had been heavily funded by my own savings because my parents claimed their business cash flow was temporarily tied up. I had paid for Leo's premium drone package myself. I had no idea that investment was about to save my life. When I arrived at the studio in the West Loop, Leo unlocked the door before I even knocked. He looked incredibly uncomfortable, shifting his weight and avoiding direct eye contact. He did not offer me coffee or make any small talk. He just led me straight to his editing bay in the back room. The space was dark, illuminated only by the glow of two massive computer monitors. I sat in the client chair, my heart pounding against my ribs. Leo took a deep breath and clicked his mouse. He explained that he was reviewing the raw drone footage captured late into the night of the reception. He had sent the drone up to get some sweeping cinematic shots of the venue exterior while the guests were dancing downstairs. The high-definition video began to play. I saw the beautiful lit gardens of the venue, the string lights reflecting off the glass windows. Then the drone slowly panned upward toward the balconies of the guest suites. It hovered near the master bridal suite, the room I had paid a small fortune to reserve. The glass doors were open. Two figures stood on the balcony, partially hidden by the shadows, but the drone's low-light lens captured them clearly. It was my new husband, Cameron. He was still wearing his tailored wedding tuxedo, his tie loosened around his neck. And standing right in front of him, pressed entirely against his body, was my sister, Madison. She was wearing her custom bridesmaid dress. My breath caught in my throat. I watched paralyzed as Cameron's hands tangled in Madison's hair. They were not sharing a friendly family hug. He pulled her closer and kissed her deeply, desperately, as if they had been doing this for years. Madison wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him down to her level, her body language completely familiar and demanding. They kissed with a hungry intensity right on the balcony of my bridal suite while I was downstairs making sure the catering staff got their tips. I sat there in Leo's dark studio watching my husband and my sister destroy my reality in pristine 4K resolution. The man who had sworn his vows to me just hours earlier was devouring my sister. The sister who had given a tearful maid of honor speech about how happy she was that I finally found someone to love my quirky, boring self. Leo paused the video and looked at the floor, apologizing profusely, saying he felt sick when he saw it and knew he had to show me the raw file before editing it out. He expected me to cry, to scream, to completely fall apart. But the tears did not come. Instead, the forensic accountant inside me woke up. The years of emotional manipulation from my parents, the constant belittling, the sudden rush to get me married to Cameron, the way my parents always made excuses for Madison's lavish lifestyle. The puzzle pieces were floating in the air, and this video was the key to snapping them together. I asked Leo to replay the footage. I needed to see it again, not to torture myself, but to process the evidence. I watched their hands, their comfort level. This was not a drunken mistake. This was an established, ongoing relationship. I asked Leo to export that exact raw file onto an encrypted flash drive for me. I thanked him for his honesty and paid him his remaining balance on the spot. I walked out of that studio into the bright afternoon sunlight. My entire life was a carefully constructed lie. My family had sold me out and my husband was a fraud. But they made one massive miscalculation. They forgot that I make my living hunting down hidden assets, tracing dirty money, and exposing liars. They thought I was just a blind, desperate woman lucky to have a ring on her finger. They had no idea that they had just handed a forensic auditor the ultimate motive to audit their entire existence. I got into my car, ignoring the text message that just popped up from Cameron asking what I wanted for dinner. I was not going to confront him. Not yet. I was going to dig, and I was going to bury them all. I sat in the stifling heat of my parked car and locked the doors. My hands were shaking, but my mind was operating with terrifying clarity. I pulled my laptop from my briefcase, resting it on the steering wheel, and inserted the encrypted flash drive Leo had given me. I needed to see it again. I needed to memorize every frame, every shadow, every single movement my husband and my sister made. I opened the video file, skipping ahead to the timestamp Leo had highlighted. The drone footage played in high definition. I watched Cameron and Madison locked together in that sickening embrace. But the video did not end there. Leo had let the drone hover for another 2 minutes before bringing it down. I watched the glass doors of the bridal suite slide open. 2 figures stepped out onto the balcony, illuminated by the soft glow of the string lights. It was my parents, David and Brenda. My breath hitched in my throat. A naive, desperate part of me expected my father to grab Cameron by the collar. I expected my mother to scream, to slap Madison to protect her eldest daughter on her wedding night. But there was no anger, there was no shock. My father calmly took a sip from his glass of scotch. My mother casually adjusted her expensive silk shawl. Leo had used a premium directional microphone attachment on the drone to capture ambient venue sounds, and the crisp night air carried their voices with devastating clarity. I turned the volume all the way up, pressing my ear closer to the laptop speakers. My father walked right up to the man I had just married. He did not punch him. He patted Cameron on the shoulder, a gesture of absolute male camaraderie. His voice was low, but every word struck me like a physical blow. "Just endure that dry, boring brat for 2 years," my father said, swirling the ice in his glass. "Wait until she uses that flawless credit score of hers to guarantee the $2 million loan for our company. Once her trust fund matures, you and Madison can officially be together. Just keep using her money until then." I hit pause. The air in my car suddenly felt too thin to breathe. I stared at the frozen image on my screen. My father, the man who had walked me down the aisle just hours before this footage was taken, was orchestrating my financial ruin. He called me a dry brat. He treated my marriage as a corporate merger, a hostile takeover designed to bleed me dry. I pressed play again, my vision blurring with hot, angry tears. My mother stepped forward, reaching out to fix a stray strand of Madison's hair. She did not look at Cameron with disgust. She looked at him like an accomplice. Be careful with Kendrick. My mother warned, her tone sharp and calculating. Do not let him get suspicious. We need his surgeon's salary as a backup plan, and he is entirely too observant. The video ended, cutting to the black screen of the media player. I slammed my laptop shut. The silence in my car was deafening. The magnitude of the betrayal was so immense it felt suffocating. This was not just a case of infidelity. This was a coordinated, premeditated conspiracy. My entire family had gathered in a circle, smiled at my face, and handed me over to a predator so they could raid my bank accounts. I was not a daughter to David and Brenda. I was human collateral, a cash cow, a financial stepping stone to save their failing logistics company and fund Madison's pathetic illusions of grandeur. My mind immediately went to the documents my father had casually placed on my dining table last week. He had called it a minor co-signing formality for some new delivery trucks. It was the $2 million commercial loan. They needed my signature because their own credit was undoubtedly completely destroyed. They needed the forensic accountant with the unblemished financial record to shoulder the debt they could never repay. Their entire logistics business was a house of cards, heavily leveraged and bleeding cash just to maintain their fake country club lifestyle. And then there was the trust fund. My grandfather had established a substantial trust for me that would become fully accessible on my 35th birthday, exactly 2 years from now. My parents knew the timeline perfectly. Cameron knew the timeline perfectly. The plan was violently simple. Drain my current income, force me to guarantee their massive corporate debt weight for the trust fund to drop, and then leave me bankrupt while Cameron and Madison walked away with the spoils. My heart ached for Kendrick, for my quiet, hardworking brother-in-law. He was an orthopedic surgeon, a man who saved lives for a living. Yet in my parents' house, he was constantly subjected to subtle racist microaggressions. My father would make condescending remarks about his background, while my mother would loudly wonder why Madison had to settle for a public hospital doctor instead of a private practice millionaire. They treated him like a second-class citizen, all while secretly plotting to use his steady income as a financial safety net for Madison's reckless spending. They were playing him just as ruthlessly as they were playing me. I wiped my eyes, refusing to shed another tear. Crying was a useless emotion, an inefficient response to a measurable problem. I am a forensic accountant. I spend my days tracking down shell companies, untangling webs of deceit, and exposing white-collar criminals who think they are smarter than the system. David, Brenda, Madison, and Cameron thought they could treat my life like a fraudulent ledger. They thought they could cook the books on my marriage and walk away with the profits. They severely underestimated who they were dealing with. They saw a boring, numbers-obsessed woman who was desperate for their validation. They failed to realize that the exact skills that made me boring were the exact skills I would use to dismantle their entire lives. I started the engine of my car. I was not going to scream. I was not going to throw a tantrum or confront them with the video. Confrontation would only give them a chance to destroy evidence, to hide their assets, to manipulate the narrative. I needed to move in absolute silence. I needed to smile at their Sunday dinners. I needed to kiss my cheating husband on the cheek. I needed to play the role of the clueless, obedient daughter, while I systematically gathered every single piece of evidence required to send them to financial and social ruin. First, I had to stop the bleeding. The credit cards were already frozen, but I needed to build a fortress around my assets. I pulled out of the parking garage and merged onto the busy Chicago street. I had a target on my back, but the game had just shifted. They thought they were the predators, but they had just handed the executioner a loaded weapon. I pulled my car into a vacant spot near a coffee shop. I turned off the engine and leaned back against the headrest. A normal bride would be hyperventilating. A normal bride would be calling her mother in hysterics, demanding answers, crying until she could not breathe. But my mother was the architect of this fraud. For years, Brenda and David had orchestrated a relentless psychological campaign against my self-esteem. They conditioned me to believe that my career was a masculine trait that repelled men. I make $400,000 a year dissecting complex corporate embezzlement schemes for one of the most ruthless financial firms in Chicago. I have a mind that can spot a misplaced decimal point in a 1,000-page ledger. Yet at the Sunday dinner table, I was constantly reduced to the stale, aging spinster who spent too much time with spreadsheets. They told me I lacked Madison's vibrant energy. They said I was too rigid, too intimidating, too plain. When Cameron entered the picture with his tailored suits and smooth real estate broker charm, my parents acted as if a savior had arrived to rescue me from a lifetime of isolation. They convinced me that his attention was a rare gift I needed to secure at all costs. I was so starved for familial approval that I bought into their narrative completely. I let them convince me that my high net worth was the only attractive thing about me, and that I should be extremely grateful Cameron was willing to overlook my supposed flaws in exchange for financial comfort. The grief evaporated in the confines of my car, replaced entirely by a freezing, razor-sharp focus. Forensic accounting is not just about doing math. It is about understanding the darkest parts of human behavior, identifying behavioral anomalies, and following the money trail until the rats have absolutely nowhere left to hide. I opened my briefcase and pulled out my personal laptop. I connected to a secure mobile hotspot and logged directly into my primary wealth management portal. If Cameron and my family were treating my life like a corporate slush fund, it was time to conduct a surprise internal audit. I brought up the transaction history for the joint accounts and the supplementary high-limit credit cards I had foolishly opened for Cameron just weeks before the wedding. My eyes scanned the lines of raw data. The numbers told a story that was painfully obvious now that the blindfold had been violently ripped off. There were the charges from his bachelor party in Las Vegas. He had claimed they stayed at a modest hotel and played golf to save money for our future. The ledger showed tens of thousands of dollars spent at high roller tables and exclusive luxury nightclubs. Then I saw the recent charges on the platinum card I handed him just last week. It was supposed to be dedicated solely for our upcoming honeymoon expenses and some minor emergency home repairs for the new house. Instead, I saw a pending charge for a $5,000 designer handbag from a boutique on the Magnificent Mile. The exact same limited edition bag my sister Madison had flaunted on her social media account yesterday morning. He was buying my sister luxury gifts using my personal line of credit. I kept scrolling, the anger crystallizing into pure strategy. There were expensive restaurant charges from midday hours when he claimed he was out showing properties to clients. There were luxury hotel bookings in the city from months ago, right in the middle of our engagement period. He was financing his affair with my own sister, using the very money I worked 80-hour weeks to earn. He was literally making me pay to fund my own betrayal. I reached for my phone. My hands were completely steady now. I bypassed my saved contacts and dialed the premium customer service line for my primary financial institution. A representative answered within seconds, asking how he could assist me today. My voice was calm, authoritative, and completely devoid of emotion. I told him I needed to report a supplementary card as compromised immediately. I gave him the card number assigned to Cameron. The representative asked if the card was simply lost or stolen. I replied that it was in the possession of an unauthorized user who was making highly fraudulent charges. I explicitly instructed the bank to decline any pending transactions from the last 48 hours, if legally possible, and to permanently close that specific line of credit. The representative offered to issue a replacement card and mail it directly to my home address. I told him absolutely not. I instructed him to put a hard security freeze on all requests for new cards, line increases, or account modifications unless verified by my physical presence at a local branch with 2 forms of government identification. I added a verbal passcode to my entire portfolio, a strict security measure that would prevent anyone, including a legal spouse, from accessing account details over the phone. The phone call lasted less than 5 minutes. In those brief moments, I completely severed Cameron's access to my immediate wealth. He was out there right now, probably planning his next lavish purchase for Madison, entirely unaware that his endless fountain of cash had just been permanently capped. The financial tourniquet was applied, stopping the hemorrhage of my hard-earned money. I sat in the quiet of my car and looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back was no longer a victim. She was a predator who had just locked onto her prey. My parents, David and Brenda, had spent my entire life chipping away at my confidence to make me highly pliable. They needed me insecure so I would never question their endless demands for money. They needed me desperate for love so I would eagerly accept a parasitic husband who would help them siphon my assets. They severely underestimated the very profession they mocked. They mocked my endless spreadsheets. They mocked my obsession with financial logic and corporate regulations. But financial logic is completely devoid of mercy. When I investigate a corrupt executive at work, I do not just look at their bank accounts. I look at their lifestyle. I look at their associates. I dismantle their reputation piece by piece until they have absolutely nothing left to leverage. I was going to apply that exact same ruthless methodology to my own family. I thought about the $2 million corporate loan my father desperately needed me to guarantee by the end of the month. David's logistics company was drowning in debt. He thought my pristine credit score and my signature were a guaranteed safety net. I would let him believe that. I would let him sleep soundly thinking his financial salvation was only days away. I would let Cameron believe the declined credit card was just a banking error, a temporary glitch in his perfect parasitic setup. I needed them to feel entirely safe. I needed them to act completely normal at our upcoming Sunday family dinner. That dinner was going to be my perfect observation deck. I needed to study their interactions with fresh eyes. I needed to watch Cameron smile at me while he discreetly passed the wine to Madison. I needed to see exactly how my parents orchestrated the room to keep everyone in their assigned roles. Most importantly, I needed to observe my brother-in-law Kendrick. Kendrick was the wild card in this entire horrific equation. He was a brilliant orthopedic surgeon, a man of intense focus and quiet dignity. My parents treated him terribly constantly, masking their prejudice behind passive-aggressive comments about his background. They belittled his choice to work at a public hospital saving lives instead of running a lucrative private practice for the elite. They tolerated him only because his medical degree provided a respectable high-earning cover for Madison's complete lack of ambition. If my family was capable of deceiving me to this incredible magnitude, they were undoubtedly using Kendrick just as ruthlessly. He was an innocent bystander trapped in their toxic web of lies. He was raising a family with a woman who was sleeping with her sister's husband. Kendrick was going to be my most valuable ally, but I needed to approach him carefully. I placed my laptop back in my briefcase and secured the encrypted flash drive in a hidden zippered compartment. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the leather interior of my car. The panic was entirely gone. The sorrow had been completely burned away, leaving only a cold mechanical drive for absolute destruction. They wanted to play a high-stakes game of deception. They wanted to treat my life and my marriage as a financial transaction. I am a forensic accountant. I control the ledger, and by the time I am finished auditing this family, every single one of their accounts will be completely empty. The game has officially begun. Sunday dinner at my parents' estate in the northern suburbs was always a carefully orchestrated theatrical production. The sprawling house, with its towering columns and perfectly manicured lawns, was designed to scream generational wealth. In reality, it was heavily mortgaged and teetering on the edge of foreclosure. I pulled my car into the circular driveway, taking one final steadying breath before stepping into the viper pit. I smoothed down my charcoal-tailored pantsuit. It was my armor. Tonight I needed every ounce of protection it offered to conceal the absolute rage boiling beneath my skin. When I walked through the heavy oak double doors, the smell of roasted lamb and expensive cedar wood filled the air. Cameron greeted me in the foyer. He wore a crisp, casual linen button-down, looking every bit the successful real estate broker he pretended to be. He leaned in and kissed my cheek. It took every fiber of my being not to recoil from his touch. I forced a warm smile, returning his greeting, with the practiced affection of a clueless newlywed wife. We moved into the formal dining room where the rest of the family was already seated. The crystal chandelier cast a warm glow over the table, illuminating the fine china and the polished silverware. My father David sat at the head of the table pouring a vintage Cabernet that I am entirely certain was charged to my account. My mother Brenda sat opposite him, her face pulled tight with expensive cosmetic procedures. Madison sat adjacent to Cameron, her posture relaxed, her smile radiant. Next to Madison sat her husband Kendrick. He offered me a quiet, genuine nod. He looked exhausted, likely coming straight off a grueling surgical shift at the hospital, yet he still maintained a quiet dignity that this family severely lacked. Almost immediately after I took my seat, my mother began her usual routine. She scrutinized my outfit, her eyes raking over my dark blazer and trousers with obvious distaste. "Sydney, darling, you are a newlywed," Brenda said, swirling her wine glass. "Could you not have found something a little more feminine to wear to Sunday dinner? That gray suit makes you look like a tired tax collector. You are going to bore your handsome husband to death if you keep dressing like a man." I kept my expression perfectly neutral, cutting a piece of roasted vegetables. I had just finished a 60-hour week tracking offshore accounts and uncovering corporate fraud, but to my mother my value was entirely dependent on my ability to look like a decorative accessory for Cameron. "I had a demanding case to wrap up, Mom," I replied evenly. I did not have time to change. David let out a condescending chuckle from the head of the table. "You work too hard, Sydney. Let the men handle the corporate stress. You should be focusing on building a home for Cameron. He needs a wife, not a business partner." Cameron reached over and patted my hand, playing his role flawlessly. "She is just dedicated, David. I admire her work ethic." His touch made my skin crawl, but I offered him an adoring look. The sheer audacity of this man defending my work ethic while actively plotting to steal the very money that work generated was staggering. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. Brenda waved her hand dismissively, shifting her attention to her favorite subject. "Well, let us look at someone who actually knows how to treat themselves. Madison, show everyone what you brought today." Madison beamed, reaching down to the empty chair beside her. She hoisted a pristine limited edition designer handbag onto the table. The soft quilted leather and gleaming gold hardware caught the light from the chandelier. It was the exact $5,000 bag I had seen on my bank statement just 24 hours ago, the one purchased on the supplementary platinum card I had frozen immediately afterward. "Is it not absolutely gorgeous?" Madison gushed, stroking the leather. Cameron helped me pick it out. He said it was a late wedding gift to welcome me into his extended family. He has such an incredible eye for fashion. I looked directly at Cameron. For a brief second, I saw a flicker of panic cross his face. He shifted his weight, his eyes darting toward my reaction. He was waiting for the explosion. He was waiting for me to recognize the timeline, to question how a man drowning in debt could afford a $5,000 luxury item. He was waiting for the dry, boring accountant to start asking questions about the budget. Instead, I leaned forward, my face lighting up with manufactured delight. "Oh my goodness, Madison, that is absolutely stunning," I said, making sure my voice carried genuine enthusiasm. "The color is perfect for you. Cameron, that was so incredibly generous of you. You really do spoil my sister." The visible relief that washed over Cameron's face was almost comical. His shoulders dropped and a smug, arrogant smile returned to his lips. He thought he was untouchable. He thought I was so desperately in love, so naive, that I would happily finance my own sister's luxury lifestyle under the guise of familial generosity. "Only the best for my new family," Cameron said smoothly, lifting his wine glass to take a confident sip. I smiled back at him, picking up my own glass. I knew something he did not. I knew that when he tried to use that platinum card to buy his morning coffee tomorrow, it was going to be declined. I knew that his entire financial safety net had been incinerated. But right now at this table, I needed them to feel invincible. I needed them to believe that their plan was working perfectly. Brenda clapped her hands together. See, Sydney, that is how you carry yourself. Madison always knows how to look effortless. You should let her take you shopping sometime. Maybe Cameron can give you his credit card for the afternoon so you can buy a dress that actually flatters your figure. That sounds like a wonderful idea, Mom, I replied, cutting into my meal. I will definitely keep that in mind. I watched them eat, drink, and laugh, secure in their delusion of grandeur. They were feasting on a foundation of lies, entirely unaware that the floor beneath them had already been removed. I glanced across the table at Kendrick. He was quietly finishing his meal, mostly ignored by the rest of the room. He looked at Madison's new bag, a slight furrow in his brow, likely wondering how his wife acquired such an expensive item on their agreed budget. He was a brilliant African-American surgeon who worked tirelessly to provide a good life, yet he was treated like an outsider in his own home. He had no idea of the absolute betrayal unfolding right next to him. My heart hardened. The dinner table was a stage, and they were all performing exactly as I expected. Let them enjoy the wine. Let them admire the stolen leather. I would continue to play the dull, oblivious daughter. The less they suspected, the deeper they would dig their own graves. The plates were cleared by the catering staff my parents could barely afford, and David leaned back in his heavy mahogany chair to swirl his expensive wine. The dining room settled into a heavy, expectant lull. This was the part of the evening my father relished most. With his belly full and his audience captive, he always took the opportunity to assert his dominance over the room. His eyes bypassed me entirely, sweeping past Cameron and Madison before locking onto the quietest person at the table. Kendrick was exhausted. I could see the dark circles under his eyes, the subtle slump of his broad shoulders that came from standing in an operating room for 14 hours. He was a brilliant orthopedic surgeon, a man who literally rebuilt shattered bones and restored lives. Yet in this house, his medical degree was treated as a blue-collar trade, simply because he chose to practice at a major public hospital in the city rather than a boutique private clinic catering to the ultra-rich. David cleared his throat, adopting a tone of faux paternal concern that masked his inherent venom. Tell me, Kendrick, are they still working you to the bone down at that county hospital? You look absolutely dreadful, son. I cannot imagine spending my days surrounded by that specific demographic of patients. It must be terribly draining. Kendrick placed his fork down gently. His voice was deep, measured, and infinitely patient. We had a multi-car pileup on the interstate last night, David. I was on call. It was a rough shift, but we managed to save everyone. It is the job. My father clicked his tongue, shaking his head with a condescending smile. Noble. Very noble. But nobility does not pay the mortgage, does it? I just worry about my daughter. Madison grew up with a certain standard of living, a certain level of comfort. Public service is admirable, but you people always seem to romanticize the struggle. At some point, you have to stop trying to save the world and start thinking about building generational wealth. You are a smart guy, Kendrick. You just need to learn how to play the game with the big boys. The microaggressions were not even thinly veiled anymore. My father was deliberately targeting Kendrick, using his race, his dedication to public service, and his grueling schedule as weapons to belittle him. David was projecting his own monumental financial failures onto the only man in the room who actually earned an honest, respectable living. Madison sat right next to her husband, swirling her wine. She did not jump to Kendrick's defense. She did not remind our father that Kendrick's salary was the only reason they had a roof over their heads. Instead, she offered a soft, compliant sigh, playing the part of the long-suffering wife who deserved so much more than a tired public servant. David gestured expansively toward my husband with his wine glass. Now you should be taking notes from Cameron here. That is a man who understands leverage, commercial real estate, passive income streams, smart, aggressive investments. Cameron knows how to let his money work for him, so his wife never has to stress about the future. That is the kind of provider a woman needs. A true investment role model. I took a slow sip of my water to hide the sharp, involuntary smile threatening to break across my face. An investment role model. Cameron was a walking financial liability with a credit score lower than a college freshman and a mountain of gambling debts. He did not possess a single passive income stream. He was entirely dependent on my bank accounts to fund his facade. Yet here was my father, a man on the brink of corporate bankruptcy, praising a degenerate gambler while humiliating a highly respected surgeon. The sheer, concentrated delusion at this table was breathtaking. Cameron leaned back, exuding a nauseating level of false humility. He adjusted his expensive watch, a piece I now realized he had likely bought with my money. I appreciate that, David. It is all about seeing the angles. Real estate is about vision. You just have to know which properties to acquire and which ones to strip down for parts. He looked directly at me when he said the words strip down for parts. The double meaning was unmistakable. He was referring to my assets, my trust fund, my life. I shifted my gaze back to Kendrick. He was staring at the intricate pattern on the table runner. His large hands were resting on his lap, but I could see the muscles in his forearms pulling tight. His knuckles were completely white. His jaw flexed rhythmically as he ground his teeth together. He was swallowing his pride, suffocating his completely justified rage, all for the sake of keeping the peace. He loved Madison. He adored their 1-year-old child. He was willing to endure the blatant disrespect, the racism, and the utter humiliation just to hold his family together. In that exact moment, watching the silent agony of a good man being crushed by my toxic family, the final piece of my strategy locked into place. I had been observing them like a forensic auditor, analyzing a corrupt corporation looking for the fatal flaw in their organizational structure. Kendrick was the weak link in their conspiracy, not because he was weak, but because he was inherently good. He did not belong to their circle of grifters. He operated on principles of loyalty and integrity, concepts completely foreign to David, Brenda, Madison, and Cameron. My family was using him as a blind stable cover for Madison's chaotic life. They thought he was too passive, too noble to ever fight back. They were wrong. A man will endure a tremendous amount of pain for the woman he loves. But when he discovers that his wife is sleeping with her sister's husband and that his pretentious in-laws are laughing behind his back, that noble restraint will instantly transform into catastrophic rage. I needed to break Kendrick's heart to set him free. I needed to show him the truth so we could burn their kingdom to the ground together. I looked down at my plate, my mind calculating the exact trajectory of my next move. The dinner theater was reaching its conclusion, and it was almost time to change the set. The clinking of expensive crystal faded as my mother ushered everyone into the formal living room for after-dinner espresso and imported cognac. They moved as a pack, laughing at a joke Cameron made, their voices echoing down the high, vaulted hallway. I began gathering the dessert plates, stacking them with methodical precision. Kendrick, standing up from his chair, immediately reached out to take the heavy serving platter from my hands. He always did that. While my husband acted like a guest in our home, Kendrick always rolled up his sleeves to assist with the cleanup. It was his nature to serve a quiet humility that my family constantly mistook for weakness. We walked into the sprawling chef's kitchen together. The bright, sterile overhead lights were a stark contrast to the warm, deceitful glow of the dining room. I handed the catering staff their payment and dismissed them early, stating I would handle the rest of the evening's cleanup. I needed the kitchen entirely empty. I needed the stage set for the destruction of a good man. Kendrick stood by the massive marble island, rinsing plates in the deep farmhouse sink. The sound of running water masked the heavy silence between us. I watched his broad back, the tension carrying over from my father's ruthless comments at the dinner table, still visible in the rigid line of his shoulders. A brief, sharp pang of guilt flared in my chest. What I was about to do to him was incredibly cruel. I was about to shatter his reality, rip his heart from his chest, and force him to look at the ugly, bleeding pieces. But a surgeon knows that sometimes you have to break a bone completely to reset it properly. I was performing a psychological amputation, and I could not afford a shaky hand. I pulled my smartphone from my blazer pocket. I unlocked the screen and navigated to the encrypted folder. I loaded the raw drone footage, the exact file Leo had given me just days prior. I set the brightness to maximum. I adjusted the volume, raising it just loud enough to be heard over the running water, but low enough that the sound would not carry down the hallway to the living room. I pressed play. I placed the phone face up on the pristine marble counter right next to the stack of crystal glasses Kendrick was reaching for. I need to grab the specialized coffee beans from the back pantry. I said, my voice smooth and completely casual. I will be right back. I stepped away, retreating into the deep shadows of the walk-in pantry. I left the door cracked just enough to maintain a clear line of sight. Kendrick turned off the faucet. He reached for a towel to dry his hands. As he turned back toward the island, the audio from my phone caught his attention. It was Madison's voice. A soft, breathless giggle that any husband would instantly recognize. Kendrick frowned, looking down at the glowing screen resting on the marble. From my hidden vantage point, I watched the exact second his world ended. He leaned closer to the screen, his towering frame casting a shadow over the counter. The high-definition video displayed his wife, the woman he loved, and provided for, wrapped entirely around my husband, on the balcony of our bridal suite. He watched Cameron bury his hands in Madison's hair. He watched the desperate, hungry, deeply familiar way they kissed. Kendrick did not gasp. He did not cry out. His reaction was a terrifying, absolute stillness. He froze like a statue carved from dark stone. But I could see his chest rising and falling with sudden, violent breaths. The towel dropped from his fingers, landing silently on the hardwood floor. Then the video continued. My parents stepped onto the balcony in the footage. The directional microphone captured my father's voice with pristine clarity. Kendrick heard David tell Cameron to endure me for 2 years to secure the $2 million corporate loan. He heard the casual, businesslike tone they used to discuss our fake marriages and their real financial schemes. And then my mother spoke. The audio played Brenda's exact calculating warning. Be careful with Kendrick. Do not let him get suspicious. We need his surgeon salary as a backup plan. Kendrick's large hands gripped the edge of the marble island. He gripped it so hard I thought the thick stone might actually crack under his sheer physical strength. His head bowed, his broad shoulders shaking with a silent, catastrophic agony. He was listening to the people who smiled at his dinner table, the people who held his 1-year-old child openly plotting to use him as a financial safety net for a sickening, adulterous affair. He realized in that agonizing moment that the microaggressions at the dinner table were not just ignorance. They were a symptom of their absolute contempt for him. He was nothing but a high-earning pawn in their twisted game. The video looped, starting over from the beginning. The sound of Madison giggling echoed against the kitchen tiles again. Kendrick snapped his head up. The devastation in his eyes had been completely incinerated, replaced by a pure, unadulterated primal rage. The veins in his neck bulged against his collar. His eyes were wide, dark, and locked onto the hallway leading to the living room. Down the hall, the sound of Cameron's arrogant laugh drifted into the kitchen. Madison's voice joined in, light and carefree. They were sitting on the expensive leather sofas, drinking our liquor, completely oblivious to the monster they had just awakened. Kendrick did not say a single word. He took a heavy, deliberate step toward the hallway, his hands curled into massive fists. He was an orthopedic surgeon. He knew exactly how the human skeletal system was put together, which meant he knew exactly how to tear it apart with his bare hands. I saw the murder radiating from his posture. He was going to walk into that living room, grab Cameron by the throat, and beat him until he stopped breathing. He was going to destroy his own life, throw away his medical license and forfeit his future, just to feel the immediate satisfaction of crushing the man who had defiled his marriage. He took another step, his heavy boots echoing on the floor. The blinding rage was pushing him toward a violent felony. I stepped out of the shadows of the pantry, my heart hammering against my ribs, and moved directly into his path. I stepped directly into his path, pressing both of my hands firmly against the center of his chest. It was like trying to stop a freight train. The sheer heat radiating from his body was terrifying, but I held my ground. I locked my eyes onto his, refusing to blink, refusing to let him look past me toward the living room, where the laughter continued to echo. "Kendrick, stop," I commanded. My voice was a sharp, low whisper that sliced through the heavy air of the kitchen. He looked down at me. His eyes were completely bloodshot, wild, and unfocused. He did not see his sister-in-law. He saw an obstacle standing between him and the man who was sleeping with his wife. He grabbed my wrists, intent on moving me aside. His grip was bruising, a testament to the adrenaline flooding his system. "Move, Sydney," he growled. His voice vibrated with a lethal frequency. "Get out of my way before I tear him apart. If you walk through that door and put your hands on him, you lose," I said, leaning my entire body weight against him. "You lose absolutely everything." He pushed against me again, but I dug my heels into the tile floor. "Listen to me," I hissed, my tone hardening into absolute ice. "If you hit him, they call the police. You are a black man in an affluent, predominantly white neighborhood assaulting a white man. How do you think that plays out? You go to jail, you lose your medical license, you lose your reputation. And what happens to Madison? She files for divorce. She plays the terrified victim. She takes full custody of your child. She takes your savings, your house, and a massive chunk of your future earnings in alimony." Kendrick stopped pushing. My words hit him like a bucket of freezing water. The brutal, undeniable reality of the American justice system and divorce courts began to penetrate the red haze of his anger. His jaw tightened, but the blind fury in his eyes began to shift into a painful, calculating horror. "If you attack him with your fists, you hand them the ultimate victory." I continued, my voice steady, relentless. "They will lock you away, and then Cameron and Madison will freely spend every dime you ever worked for. They will raise your child on your dime while laughing at you from their country club." He released my wrists. He took a heavy, staggering step backward, running a trembling hand over his face. He looked at the smartphone still glowing on the marble island, then back at me. The betrayal was crushing him, suffocating him right in front of my eyes. "How long?" he asked, his voice cracking with a devastating vulnerability. "How long have you known about this?" "I found out 3 hours ago," I replied, picking up the phone and securing it back in my pocket. "The wedding videographer caught it on a drone camera and called me. They have been planning this since before my wedding. They used my credit score to secure a $2 million loan for my father's failing company, and they are using your surgeon's salary to fund Madison's luxury lifestyle. We are nothing but human bank accounts to them." Kendrick braced his hands on the edge of the sink, hanging his head as he fought to regulate his breathing. The sound of my parents laughing in the living room drifted down the hallway again. It was a sickening soundtrack to our mutual destruction. "I cannot go back out there," he whispered, the raw agony evident in his posture. "I cannot look at her. I will kill him." "You are not going to kill anyone," I said, stepping closer to him. "You are a surgeon. You fix people. I am a forensic accountant. I destroy them." He turned his head to look at me, a silent question in his dark, grieving eyes. "Physical violence is a temporary satisfaction with permanent consequences," I explained, laying out the strategy with absolute precision. "But financial ruin is a slow, agonizing death that they will never recover from." My parents care about one thing above all else: their status, their wealth, their image. Cameron cares about access to my money. Madison cares about designer bags and country club memberships. I watched the realization spark in his eyes. The fiery, uncontrolled rage was officially transitioning into a cold, calculated hunger for retribution. "If we do this my way, I promised we will strip them of absolutely everything. I will dismantle my father's logistics company piece by piece. I will bankrupt Cameron so thoroughly he will never secure a mortgage broker license again. We will legally and financially corner Madison so she leaves your marriage with nothing but the clothes on her back. We will expose their fraud to the IRS, to their high society friends, and to the entire city of Chicago. We will leave them completely destitute." Kendrick stood up straight. The exhaustion that had plagued him all evening was completely gone. He looked at me, really looked at me, no longer seeing the boring, rigid accountant my family always claimed I was. He saw the executioner. He saw the exact person he needed to navigate this nightmare. "What do we do first?" he asked. His voice was no longer shaking. It was a deep, resonant baritone filled with absolute resolve. "First we smile," I instructed. "We walk back into that living room, we drink their expensive cognac, and we play our parts flawlessly. We give them enough rope to hang themselves. You need to act like the tired, devoted husband. I need to act like the naive, loving wife. And tomorrow we start digging into every single secret they have buried." Kendrick stared down the hallway toward the living room. He adjusted the cuffs of his shirt, smoothing out the wrinkles. He took one final deep breath, locking his trauma behind a wall of titanium. He turned back to me and extended his large right hand. I looked at his hand, then up at his face. This was not a comforting embrace between grieving victims. This was a pact, a bloodless declaration of war against the people sitting just 50 feet away from us. I reached out and grasped his hand. His grip was firm, cold, and completely unyielding. I returned the pressure. The handshake sealed our alliance. The despised son-in-law and the exploited daughter had just become the architects of a complete family annihilation. We released our grip, turned our backs on the kitchen, and walked together toward the living room to smile at the devils. Cameron slammed the platinum card onto our granite kitchen counter. The plastic made a sharp, aggressive smack against the stone. It was Tuesday evening, and he had just returned from what he claimed was a high-stakes property viewing. His face was flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and indignant rage. "Sydney, what is going on with this account?" he demanded, crossing his arms over his tailored suit jacket. "I tried to pay for a client lunch at the steakhouse today, and my card was declined." It was incredibly humiliating. The waiter looked at me like I was some kind of deadbeat. I had to use my personal debit card. I knew exactly what he was trying to buy. The bank alerts had pinged my secure phone all afternoon. He had not been at a steakhouse. He had attempted to purchase a $2,000 diamond bracelet from a jeweler downtown, undoubtedly another token of affection for my sister. He was lying straight to my face, using the word client to cover his tracks. I did not confront him. I did not scream. Instead, I let my shoulders drop and buried my face in my hands, executing a flawless performance of a terrified, overwhelmed corporate wife. I had spent the entire afternoon printing out terrifying-looking financial spreadsheets, federal tax codes, and a massive, dense legal contract drafted by my personal attorney. I had scattered them across the dining table specifically for this moment. "Cameron, it is a disaster," I whispered, my voice trembling perfectly. "The bank did not just decline your card. They froze all of my secondary accounts." His arrogant posture instantly dissolved into genuine panic. "What do you mean they froze them?" "Why?" the IRSI said, looking up at him with wide, panicked eyes. "My firm's compliance department pulled me into a meeting this morning. Because of my income bracket and my involvement in auditing high-profile corporate fraud cases, the IRS has flagged my personal portfolio for a random intensive audit." I watched the color drain completely from his handsome face. White-collar criminals and con artists fear one thing more than anything else in this world, and that is the Internal Revenue Service. But it gets worse. I continued pacing the kitchen to sell my manufactured anxiety. "You know, my father is pressuring me to guarantee that $2 million commercial loan for his logistics company. The IRS algorithms picked up on the preliminary credit inquiries. They are threatening to put a temporary hold on all marital assets until the audit is clear. Cameron, they could come after your real estate commissions. They could freeze your personal checking accounts just because your name is attached to my profile." His eyes widened in absolute terror. Cameron was broke, drowning in gambling debts, and entirely reliant on my money to maintain his fake affluent lifestyle. The thought of federal agents looking into his shady finances and cutting off his access to cash terrified him more than death. He knew his own financial records were a disaster of unpaid debts and hidden expenses. "They cannot do that," he stammered, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "My commissions are my own money. We just got married. They cannot touch my earnings. I know, I cried, sounding desperate and apologetic. I am so sorry, Cameron. I never wanted my corporate liabilities to drag you down. You work so hard for your real estate deals. I cannot let the government seize your hard-earned money because of my complicated tax brackets. I walked over to the dining table and picked up the thick stack of legal documents I had prepared. I carried them over to the kitchen island and set them down in front of him. "What is this?" he asked, staring at the paper as if it were a bomb. "It is a post-nuptial agreement," I said, pointing to the bold heading at the top of the page. "I had my corporate lawyer draft it as an emergency measure. It is a legal loophole. If we sign this right now, it legally separates all of our finances entirely. What is mine remains mine, and what is yours remains yours. It removes your name from my liabilities. It protects your income, your future earnings, and your assets from any IRS action taken against me or my father's company." He stared at the document. He was greedy, arrogant, and fundamentally stupid. A deadly combination. "If I sign this, the IRS cannot touch my money," he asked, his voice tightening with greed. "Exactly," I assured him softly. "You will be completely legally insulated, but it also means I cannot share my accounts with you until the audit is over. You will have to rely on your own commissions for a while." "I am so sorry, honey." Cameron did not care about my apology. He did not care about the stress I was supposedly facing from a federal audit. His mind was racing, calculating how this would save his own skin. He believed he was outsmarting the system. He thought this document would protect his non-existent wealth and keep him safe from my family's impending financial collapse, leaving him perfectly positioned to run away with Madison once my trust fund dropped. He did not bother to read the 50 pages of dense legal jargon. If he had, he would have seen the irrevocable clauses. He would have seen that he was permanently waiving all rights to spousal support, all claims to my real estate, all access to my investment portfolios, and absolutely any right to my grandfather's trust fund. He was voluntarily legally disinheriting himself from every single dime I owned. He grabbed the pen from the counter. "I have to protect my business," Cameron said, justifying his eagerness. "I have massive deals closing next month. I cannot have the feds freezing my escrow accounts because of your firm's compliance issues." "I understand," I whispered, playing the supportive, sacrificial wife. "Just sign at the bottom of the last 3 pages. I will have it notarized and filed by my lawyer first thing tomorrow morning." He flipped to the back of the thick packet. He did not hesitate. He signed his name with aggressive, confident strokes, sealing his own absolute destruction. He handed the pen back to me, exhaling a massive sigh of relief. "We will get through this audit," he said, offering me a fake, reassuring smile. "We are a team, but business is business." "Yes," I replied, taking the signed contract and sliding it safely into my leather briefcase. "Business is business." He turned around and walked out of the kitchen, presumably to text my sister about the narrow escape he just pulled off. I stood alone in the bright kitchen, staring at my briefcase. He just handed me the keys to his complete financial execution. My assets were perfectly insulated. My trust fund was permanently out of his reach. He was now legally nothing to me but a roommate with an expiring lease. 2 days after securing the post-nuptial agreement, my secure office phone rang well past regular business hours. I was sitting alone in my high-rise building, the Chicago skyline glittering outside my window. I picked up the receiver and heard Kendrick breathing heavily on the other end. He told me he was in the underground parking garage and he had something I needed to see. I packed up my equipment, took the private elevator down to the basement level, and found him leaning against the hood of his car in the dim fluorescent light. He reached into his leather messenger bag and pulled out a sleek silver iPad. He handed it to me. His expression was a mixture of absolute exhaustion and suppressed fury. He explained that Madison had carelessly left it charging on his nightstand while she went out for an evening networking event. She believed Kendrick was too noble, too trusting to ever snoop through her personal devices. She relied on his integrity to shield her deception. But Kendrick was no longer the trusting husband they took him for. He asked me if I could bypass her basic security and find out exactly how deep the betrayal went. I took the device from his hands. People like my sister always assume that dragging an item to the trash bin on a screen means it is permanently erased from existence. They do not understand digital footprints. They do not understand that devices continuously sync to hidden cloud backups, creating a permanent ledger of every single lie they tell. I am a forensic accountant. Extracting hidden data from uncooperative hardware is practically my second language. I told Kendrick to follow me. We drove to a quiet 24-hour diner on the outskirts of the city, a place where no one from our affluent circle would ever step foot. We sat in a corner booth, shielding the screen from any passing waitstaff. I connected the iPad to my specialized laptop using a diagnostic cable. I ran a series of recovery protocols I typically use to pull hidden financial records from seized corporate servers. It took less than 20 minutes for my software to break through the superficial passcodes and access the archived data dumps that Madison thought she had permanently deleted. The screen populated with hundreds of recovered text message threads, encrypted email drafts, and deleted photo attachments. Kendrick sat rigidly across from me, his jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscles jumping in his face. I opened the most recent deleted message threads between Madison and Cameron. The sheer volume of their correspondence was staggering. We sat in the vinyl booth and read through months of illicit conversations. They were not just coordinating brief encounters, they were orchestrating an entire parallel life. I found digital receipts for boutique hotel rooms downtown, booked on the exact same nights Kendrick was scheduled for intensive overnight emergency room surgeries. I found messages where Cameron mocked my work schedule, laughing with my sister about how easy it was to slip away while I was buried in tax documents. They traded cruel, dismissive jokes about both of us. They called Kendrick the workhorse and referred to me as the bank. Kendrick closed his eyes, pressing the heels of his hands against his forehead. The pain radiating from him was palpable. Reading the exact words his wife used to mock his dedication to his medical career was a brutal psychological blow. But the romantic betrayal was only the first layer of the corruption hidden on that device. I shifted my focus away from the text messages and opened her recovered email application. I bypassed the personal inbox and went straight for the deleted financial attachments. If my parents were willing to use my credit to save their logistics company, I needed to know exactly where their remaining cash was currently flowing. I ran a search filter for any documents containing my father's corporate tax identification number or the name of his logistics firm. Dozens of PDF files instantly populated the screen. I opened the first one. It was a wire transfer receipt from David's corporate account directly into a private limited liability company, registered solely under Madison's name. I opened another, and then another. The pattern was undeniable and entirely illegal. I turned the laptop so Kendrick could see the screen. I explained exactly what we were looking at. My father, David, was intentionally bleeding his own logistics company dry. He was taking the shrinking operational revenue that should have been used to pay their vendors, their drivers, and their corporate taxes, and he was funneling it directly to Madison. He masked these massive transfers as fictitious consulting fees and bogus marketing retainers for her non-existent lifestyle brand. My parents were actively embezzling from their own failing corporation to fund Madison's luxury shopping habits. They were committing corporate fraud to ensure their golden child never had to get a real job. And the most sickening part of the entire scheme was the timeline. The dates on the wire transfers aligned perfectly with the days my father had sat in my living room, looking me in the eye and begging me to guarantee a $2 million loan to save his business from bankruptcy. He was hiding cash in his youngest daughter's bank accounts while preparing to leave his eldest daughter completely responsible for his colossal corporate debt. They were setting me up to take the fall for a company they had deliberately bankrupted. Kendrick stared at the wire transfers, his voice dropping to a dangerous, terrifying whisper. They are using my income to pay the mortgage and the daily household bills so she can hoard all this stolen corporate cash to build a nest egg with your husband. Exactly. I replied, my voice as cold as the coffee sitting untouched on our table. They are draining us from both sides. David and Brenda are protecting Madison's financial future by sacrificing ours. They are laundering money through her so that when the logistics company finally collapses, the federal government will not be able to seize those specific funds. Kendrick leaned back against the booth. The sheer magnitude of the conspiracy was almost too much for a normal person to process. But we were no longer acting like normal people. We were survivors trapped in a burning building, and we had just found the blueprints to the arsonist's hideout. I downloaded every single wire transfer receipt, every fraudulent invoice, and every hotel booking onto my secure encrypted drive. I had the undeniable proof of corporate embezzlement. I had the paper trail that proved my father was committing massive financial fraud. I had the exact documentation the Internal Revenue Service would need to launch a full-scale criminal investigation into David and Brenda's entire operation. I disconnected the iPad and handed it back to Kendrick. I told him to place it exactly where he found it on the nightstand. Madison would never know we had breached her digital fortress. She would wake up tomorrow morning completely oblivious to the fact that her financial and romantic destruction was already guaranteed. But as I was closing the data recovery software, one final heavily encrypted medical document caught my eye in the deepest layer of the deleted files. The file name was a string of random numbers distinct from her usual shopping receipts. I paused, my finger hovering over the mouse. I clicked the file, decrypting the final document. As the page loaded onto my screen, the blood completely drained from my face. The financial fraud was devastating, but the secret hidden in this single medical bill was about to push Kendrick into a level of darkness neither of us could have ever anticipated. I clicked the decrypted file and the screen flickered for a fraction of a second before a massive PDF document loaded. It was not a corporate tax return or a bank statement. It was an archived export of a group text message thread from exactly 2.5 years ago. The metadata indicated it had been pulled from an old phone backup that Madison thought she had wiped completely clean. I scrolled up to the very first message in the thread. The participants were Madison, my mother Brenda, and my husband Cameron. The date on the first message was December 14th. It was a picture of a positive pregnancy test resting on my parents' granite bathroom counter. Beneath the picture was a frantic message from Madison. What do we do? Cameron is completely broke. He just lost his commercial real estate license for the quarter, and he is drowning in gambling debt. He cannot afford a child, and Dad refuses to pay for another mistake. My eyes darted to the next line. It was a response from my mother. Her words were so ruthlessly calculating that they made my blood run cold. You cannot have a baby with a broke broker, Brenda wrote. You will ruin your entire life. You need to find someone stable immediately. What about that new orthopedic resident at the public hospital you went on one date with last month? The tall one, Kendrick. He makes $300,000 a year and he is an honorable man. He has a pristine record. You are going to trap him. You will sleep with him again this weekend, wait 3 weeks, and tell him the child is his. He will marry you to do the right thing. I stopped breathing. I could physically feel the air leave my lungs. I moved my hand to close the laptop, a desperate instinct to protect the man sitting across from me from reading the rest of the screen. But Kendrick was already leaning over the table. His dark eyes were locked onto the glowing text. He was reading the exact blueprint of his own entrapment. The thread continued. Cameron chimed in perfectly fine with his unborn child being used as a pawn. Just tell the doctor the baby gets his features from your side of the family, Cameron texted. I will stay close by. We will figure this out when I find a cash cow of my own to marry. I just need someone with a perfect credit score to clear my debts. Kendrick let out a sound that I will never forget for the rest of my life. It was not a cry or a shout. It was a suffocated, agonizing gasp, like a man who had just taken a bullet directly to the chest. He collapsed back against the vinyl booth of the diner, clutching his stomach. The 1-year-old boy sleeping in the nursery of his home. The little boy Kendrick rocked to sleep after grueling 14-hour surgical shifts. The child he had bought a house for the child he had altered his entire life to protect and provide for. That boy was not his son. That boy belonged to the degenerate gambler sitting in my living room. My family had known everything. David and Brenda knew that their grandson belonged to Cameron. When Cameron went bankrupt, they realized he was entirely useless to them. They needed a wealthy, honorable scapegoat to take the financial and social burden off their hands. They looked around and saw Kendrick, a dedicated, brilliant African-American surgeon who valued family and responsibility above all else. They threw Madison at him, orchestrated a rapid pregnancy narrative, and forced him into a marriage built on the most disgusting, unforgivable fraud imaginable. The sheer, unadulterated evil of their actions began to process in my mind. My parents sat at Sunday dinners drinking expensive wine, making passive-aggressive racist remarks about Kendrick working at a public hospital. They constantly belittled his background and his career. And all the while, they were secretly relying on his relentless, exhausting labor to raise their white grandson. They made a black doctor finance the bastard child of a broke white real estate broker, and they laughed about it behind his back. Kendrick buried his face in his hands. His broad shoulders shook violently. The betrayal was so absolute, so complete, that it was destroying his mind in real time. He had married a woman he thought he loved because he believed it was his duty to raise his child in a stable home. He had endured years of psychological abuse and blatant disrespect from my parents just to keep the peace for the sake of his son. Now he was staring at digital proof that his fatherhood was nothing but a calculated financial transaction. "They stole my son," Kendrick whispered, his voice cracking with a devastation so profound it brought tears to my own eyes. "They made me love him. They made me his father. And he is not even mine." I reached across the sticky diner table and grabbed his arm. I gripped him as hard as I could, anchoring him to the present moment. He was spiraling into a dark, dangerous place, and I needed him sharp. I needed him lethal. "Listen to me," I said, my voice fiercely determined. "You are that boy's father. You are the one who wakes up in the middle of the night to feed him. You are the one who provides for him. Biology does not make Cameron a father. Cameron is a parasite who sold his own child for financial convenience." Kendrick lifted his head. His eyes were entirely hollow, stripped of the gentle, patient doctor I had always known. The man sitting across from me was completely broken, but the pieces were reassembling into something terrifying. "I need a DNA test," Kendrick stated, his tone dropping an octave. "I need legal, undeniable proof that will stand up in a court of law. I am not going to just walk away from this. I am going to make sure the judge sees exactly what she did." "You will get the test tomorrow," I instructed, closing my laptop and securing it in my bag. "You take the boy to your hospital. You run the genetics panel. You get the medical records officially stamped and certified. But you do not breathe a single word of this to Madison. You go home tonight, you get into that bed, and you act like the faithful, exhausted husband she thinks you are." He stared at the table, his fists clenched tightly on the surface. "How do I look at her without tearing the house apart? You look at her and remember that she is going to lose everything I promised him. The financial fraud I found on this iPad is enough to send my parents to federal prison. The infidelity is enough to void Cameron's access to my assets. But this paternity fraud, this is the weapon that will leave Madison completely destitute. When you file for divorce, you will present the DNA evidence. You will prove she orchestrated a massive financial and emotional deception. She will get zero alimony. She will be buried in the credit card debt she racked up. You will walk away clean, and they will be left to feed on each other in the wreckage." Kendrick slowly nodded. The tears were gone. The shock had passed. My family had played him for a fool, but they failed to realize they had handed the ultimate leverage to a man who knew how to dissect human anatomy with surgical precision. He was going to apply that exact same precision to his divorce. We stood up from the booth and walked out into the cold Chicago night. The wind whipped around us, but neither of us felt the chill. We had the blueprints of their entire conspiracy. We had the financial wire transfers, the hotel receipts, the hidden text messages, and the confession of paternity fraud. We had every single piece of ammunition required to execute a flawless catastrophic retaliation. The preparation phase was officially over. It was time to build the stage for their public execution. The freezing wind off Lake Michigan whipped around us in the diner parking lot, but Kendrick stood completely paralyzed. The sheer gravity of the betrayal was dragging him into a psychological abyss. I watched this brilliant, towering man fold in on himself. He leaned against the icy metal of his car door, struggling to pull air into his lungs. The family he had bled for, the child he had stayed awake nights to comfort, was entirely built on a foundation of parasitic fraud. My parents had weaponized his profound sense of duty. I stepped directly in front of him, blocking the harsh streetlights. I refused to let him drown in the sorrow they had manufactured. I grabbed his coat, forcing him to stand upright and look me in the eye. I told him that grief was a luxury we could not afford right now. I reminded him that the little boy sleeping in that nursery knew exactly one father, and it was the man standing in front of me. Cameron was merely a biological donor who had bartered his own flesh and blood to escape a gambling debt. Biology did not make him a parent, but the law could certainly make him a target. I instructed Kendrick to channel every single ounce of his devastation into a clinical, ruthless pursuit of justice. He nodded slowly. The warmth and gentle patience that usually defined his features had completely evaporated. What remained was the chilling, absolute focus of a surgeon preparing to excise a terminal tumor. He promised me he would secure the biological evidence the very next day. The following morning, Kendrick executed his part of the plan with terrifying efficiency. He told Madison he was taking the 1-year-old boy to his hospital for a routine pediatric consultation. Madison, entirely consumed by her morning routine of online shopping, barely glanced up from her phone as they left the house. She had zero concept of the legal trap closing around her neck. At the hospital, Kendrick bypassed his usual orthopedic wing and walked directly into the genetics laboratory. He used his medical credentials to initiate a strict court-admissible DNA paternity test. This was not a cheap commercial kit bought from a pharmacy. This was a certified chain of custody procedure required for high-stakes family court litigation. The laboratory technician carefully swabbed the inside of the toddler's cheek, sealing the sample in a tamper-evident vial. Kendrick submitted his own DNA alongside it. He stood in that sterile, brightly lit laboratory and watched the vial get locked into the testing queue. He knew exactly what the results would say, but he needed the official hospital seal to absolutely decimate Madison in front of a judge. The medical documentation would completely shield him from paying a single dime of child support or alimony to the woman who had orchestrated this horrific deception. While Kendrick secured the genetic weapon, I was in my downtown office, building the financial guillotine. I locked my office door and pulled up the encrypted files we had extracted from Madison's deleted iPad backups. I opened a massive blank digital ledger and began to systematically map out my father's entire corporate structure. I traced the initial operational revenue of David's logistics company. I documented the exact dates and times he had authorized massive unjustified wire transfers to the private limited liability company registered in Madison's name. I cross-referenced those dates with the days my father had sat in my living room pleading poverty and begging me to guarantee a $2 million commercial loan. The audacity of his greed was sickening, but as a forensic accountant, I found the paper trail absolutely beautiful. I compiled the fraudulent invoices Madison had generated for fictitious consulting services. I pulled the property records and bank statements showing how they used Kendrick's massive surgeon salary to cover their primary mortgage and daily living expenses, effectively laundering the stolen corporate cash to build a secret nest egg for Madison and Cameron. Every single transfer was a direct violation of federal tax laws. They were actively concealing taxable income, committing corporate embezzlement, and engaging in systematic money laundering to defraud their creditors. I printed the bank statements, the routing numbers, and the corresponding text messages where my mother explicitly outlined their financial strategy. I organized the documents with meticulous, undeniable clarity. I highlighted the exact monetary discrepancies. I created a comprehensive timeline that a federal investigator could follow blindfolded. Then I pulled up the official Internal Revenue Service website. I downloaded the federal document used to report suspected tax fraud and corporate embezzlement. I filled in David's name, his corporate tax identification number, and the exact dollar amounts he had illegally funneled to Madison. I attached the thick stack of undeniable evidence. I did not submit the report anonymously. I signed my own name at the bottom of the federal form, attaching my professional credentials as a certified forensic accountant. I wanted the investigating agents to know this intelligence came from an industry expert who had already done the heavy lifting for them. I placed the massive stack of documents into a thick priority shipping envelope. I sealed the flap, running my hand firmly over the adhesive edge. This was the point of no return. Once this envelope entered the federal mail system, David's logistics company would be subjected to a microscopic, devastating federal audit. The agents would freeze his corporate accounts, seize his assets, and likely pursue criminal charges that carried heavy federal prison sentences. I walked out of my office and took the elevator down to the lobby. I approached the secure outgoing mail drop box. I did not hesitate. I did not feel a single shred of guilt for the parents who had tried to sell me into financial slavery. I dropped the heavy envelope into the metal chute. The solid thud of the package hitting the bottom of the bin sounded like a judge slamming a gavel. The federal trap was officially set. Kendrick had the medical evidence required to obliterate his marriage. I had the financial evidence required to bankrupt my parents and send them to prison. Cameron was already locked out of my bank accounts and bound by a post-nuptial agreement he was too arrogant to read. The explosive charges were planted at the foundation of their entire fake empire. All we needed now was the perfect stage to light the match. We needed an audience to witness their absolute destruction. We needed the 1-month anniversary dinner. The private ballroom of the most exclusive French restaurant in downtown Chicago was a masterclass in financial deception. Crystal chandeliers the size of small vehicles hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm golden light over 50 tables draped in imported silk. Waiters in pristine white jackets circulated through the room, carrying silver trays of champagne and beluga caviar. To the untrained eye, it was a breathtaking display of generational wealth and limitless prosperity. To a forensic accountant, it was an active crime scene of a family hemorrhaging its last drop of cash to maintain a dying illusion. This was my 1-month anniversary party. David and Brenda had orchestrated this entire extravagant spectacle under the guise of celebrating my union with Cameron. In reality, this was a high-stakes public relations stunt. I stood near the entrance in a sleek emerald evening gown, a flute of sparkling water in my hand, observing the room with the detached precision of an apex predator. There was not a single genuine family friend in attendance. The guest list was meticulously curated by my father. The room was packed with corporate investors, regional banking executives, and high-net-worth logistics partners. These were the exact men David owed money to, the exact people he needed to impress to keep his failing logistics empire from collapsing. He was using my anniversary as a stage to parade my apparent financial stability, silently assuring his creditors that his eldest daughter was about to inject $2 million of fresh capital into his business. I took a slow sip of my water, savoring a secret that made the entire evening feel utterly comedic. I knew exactly how this lavish party had been funded, and it was a direct result of the financial trap I had set days earlier. The management of this particular restaurant required a $50,000 deposit simply to secure the private ballroom for a weekend evening. Earlier that week, my security alerts had pinged with a fascinating notification. Someone had attempted to run a $50,000 charge on the supplementary platinum credit card I had previously assigned to Cameron. The charge was immediately flagged and aggressively declined because I had permanently frozen that account. I could vividly picture the sheer panic that must have gripped my father in the restaurant booking office. He had fully expected Cameron to use my pristine credit line to foot the bill for this massive corporate charade. When the card bounced, David had absolutely no choice. To cancel the party would signal financial ruin to his investors. He was forced to bite the bullet, draining the absolute last remaining reserves of his corporate operational accounts to cover the deposit himself. He was literally spending stolen company money that belonged to his vendors and employees just to buy caviar for men he was planning to defraud. He was bleeding out financially. Yet tonight he walked around the ballroom with his chest puffed out, playing the role of the undisputed king of Chicago logistics. Brenda floated through the crowd in a designer gown she had undoubtedly purchased with the embezzled corporate funds funneled through Madison. She clung to Cameron's arm, parading him around the room like a prize stallion. She introduced him to bank executives as her brilliant son-in-law, a titan of commercial real estate. Cameron soaked up the admiration with revolting arrogance. He wore a custom-tailored tuxedo, flashing his bright, rehearsed smile at anyone who made eye contact. He truly believed he was invincible. He thought he had outsmarted the IRS with the post-nuptial agreement. He thought my trust fund was a guaranteed payday just waiting to mature. He had absolutely no idea that the signature he provided on that document had legally stripped him of every single asset, leaving him with nothing but his own catastrophic gambling debts. I watched Cameron lean down and whisper something into my mother's ear. They both chuckled, sharing a conspiratorial glance. They thought I was oblivious. They thought I was just the dull, obedient accountant standing in the corner, grateful that such a handsome, charismatic man had chosen to marry me. They had no concept of the federal guillotine hanging directly over their necks. The package I had mailed to the Internal Revenue Service was already processing in the federal system. The audit was inevitable, and it was going to be merciless. The heavy mahogany doors of the ballroom swung open, and the atmosphere in the room shifted. Madison entered, draped in a backless scarlet gown that demanded the attention of every man in the vicinity. She paused at the threshold, posing for a moment to ensure her grand entrance was properly acknowledged. She carried the $5,000 designer handbag Cameron had attempted to buy with my money, oblivious to the fact that it was a blazing beacon of their fraudulent affair. Walking exactly one step behind her was Kendrick. The breath caught in my throat for a fraction of a second as I looked at him. Kendrick wore a perfectly cut midnight blue suit. His posture was impeccable, his broad shoulders squared, his hands resting easily at his sides. But it was his face that commanded my absolute respect. He was executing a flawless performance. The gentle, accommodating doctor my family loved to mock was completely gone, buried under a layer of absolute terrifying stillness. His dark eyes scanned the room, missing nothing, revealing absolutely zero emotion. He had done it. I could tell by the rigid, calculated way he moved. The certified medical documents from the hospital genetics laboratory were locked and secured. He had the undeniable DNA proof that the 1-year-old boy he tucked into bed every night was actually Cameron's biological son. He was standing in a room full of Chicago's elite, acting as the devoted husband to a woman who had orchestrated the most despicable betrayal imaginable. The sheer mental fortitude it took for Kendrick to walk into this ballroom without immediately breaking Cameron's jaw was a testament to his lethal focus. Our eyes met across the crowded room, through the sea of moving waiters and clinking glasses. Kendrick offered me a very small, almost imperceptible nod. The signal was clear. The medical evidence was ready. The weapon was loaded. Madison immediately abandoned her husband and gravitated toward the center of the room where Cameron and Brenda were holding court. I watched Cameron's eyes drop to Madison's waistline, a brief, hungry glance that he quickly masked with a polite smile. They were so incredibly careless, so emboldened by their own deception, that they were actively flirting in front of 50 corporate executives. I checked the subtle silver watch on my wrist. The evening was progressing exactly on schedule. The guests were taking their seats, guided by the elegant calligraphy on the place cards. The multi-course dinner was about to begin, which meant my father was gearing up for his favorite part of any social gathering: the grand commanding speech. He was going to stand up, command the attention of his wealthy investors, and publicly attempt to lock me into his financial suicide pact. I took my assigned seat at the head table, positioned perfectly between my fraudulent husband and my deceitful mother. I smoothed my napkin over my lap, feeling the cold, hard edge of my smartphone resting in my hidden pocket. The digital connection to the venue's master projector system was already established. The guests were expecting a romantic montage of wedding photos. They were expecting a toast to family loyalty and enduring love. I picked up my crystal water glass and took a final steadying sip. Let them pour the champagne. Let them eat the imported caviar my father had bankrupted himself to buy. They were enjoying their very last meal as members of high society. The stage was set, the audience was seated, and the curtain was about to rise on their absolute annihilation. The clinking of a silver spoon against a crystal champagne flute cut through the low hum of conversation in the ballroom. The sound was sharp, demanding immediate compliance from every guest in attendance. I looked toward the center of the head table. My father David was standing up, adjusting the lapels of his custom tuxedo. The room instantly quieted down. Waiters froze in place, holding silver trays of decadent desserts, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. This was it. The moment my father had orchestrated this entire absurdly expensive evening for. He was preparing to execute his ultimate financial maneuver, using the guise of a heartfelt toast to trap me into a corner I could never escape. David cleared his throat, projecting his voice with the practiced booming resonance of a man who believed he owned the world. He looked out over the sea of high-net-worth investors, regional banking executives, and wealthy socialites. He offered them a wide, magnanimous smile. Friends, esteemed colleagues, and honored guests, my father began holding his champagne flute perfectly level. Thank you all for joining us tonight in this magnificent venue. We are gathered here to celebrate a very special milestone. The 1-month anniversary of my eldest daughter, Sydney, and her incredible husband, Cameron. Polite applause rippled through the room. I kept my face arranged in a mask of pleasant devotion, turning my head to look at Cameron. He beamed at the crowd, soaking up the validation like a sponge. David raised his free hand to quiet the applause, his expression shifting into something deeply serious and manufactured. You know, in the logistics business, we talk a lot about supply chains. We talk about assets, liabilities, and strategic partnerships. But as I look around this room tonight, I am reminded of the only partnership that truly matters: family. Family is the absolute foundation of any great empire. It is the bedrock of loyalty. It is the ultimate safety net when the waters get rough. I felt a sickening twist in my stomach. The absolute audacity of this man standing in front of the very creditors he was actively defrauding, preaching about loyalty, while his logistics company was bleeding out from his own embezzlement. I glanced at Kendrick. He was sitting completely motionless, his dark eyes fixed on my father with a terrifying intensity. Kendrick knew exactly how highly this family valued loyalty. When Sydney first brought Cameron home, David continued, his voice dripping with faux emotion. Brenda and I knew instantly that he was the missing piece to our family puzzle. Sydney has always been our brilliant, hardworking girl, a true titan of the financial sector. But she was entirely consumed by her work. She was married to her spreadsheets. Cameron brought a spark of life into her world. He showed her that true wealth is not just about the numbers in a bank account. It is about building a legacy together. My mother Brenda dabbed at the corner of her eye with a silk napkin, playing the part of the moved matriarch to absolute perfection. And that brings me to the future, my father announced, his tone suddenly shifting from emotional father to aggressive corporate closer. He turned his body to face me directly, ensuring that every single investor in the room followed his gaze. The spotlight was now blindingly bright, and it was aimed straight at my throat. As many of you know, our family logistics firm is standing on the precipice of a massive, unprecedented expansion. We are preparing to acquire new fleets, secure new warehouses, and dominate the Midwest market. But a vision that bold requires immense trust and flawless financial backing. That is why I am incredibly proud to announce tonight that this expansion is going to be a true family endeavor. The trap was officially springing shut. He was doing it. He was weaponizing the presence of 50 powerful executives to publicly force my hand. Sydney and Cameron have graciously decided to merge their incredible success with ours. David projected his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. They are stepping up to the plate. Sydney, my brilliant daughter, is bringing her unmatched financial acumen and her pristine credit backing to officially guarantee the $2 million capital injection our company needs to launch this new era. The room erupted into enthusiastic applause. The banking executives at the front tables nodded in deep approval. To them, this was the ultimate signal of corporate stability. The CEO's highly successful forensic accountant daughter was personally vouching for the company's debt. The risk was eliminated. David had successfully manipulated the narrative, painting me into a corner where denying the loan would not only humiliate my family, but also destroy my own professional reputation in front of Chicago's elite financial community. Cameron leaned over and kissed my cheek, whispering in my ear for the benefit of the watching crowd. "You are amazing, baby. Thank you for doing this for us." I looked down at the crisp white tablecloth. They really thought they had won. They thought the social pressure of this opulent ballroom would paralyze me. They assumed I would simply smile, nod, and quietly sign my own financial death warrant to avoid making a scene in front of polite society. They completely forgot that a forensic auditor does not fear a scene. We meticulously dissect scenes to expose the criminals hiding within them. The applause began to die down. The room waited with bated breath for the devoted daughter to stand up and accept her role as the sacrificial lamb. I pushed my chair back slowly. The wooden legs scraped softly against the polished floor. I stood up to my full height, smoothing the front of my emerald evening gown. I reached out and took the microphone from the stand positioned near the center of the table. The cold metal grounded me. I looked directly at my father. His smile was wide, victorious, and completely fake. I looked at Brenda, who was already raising her glass in a premature toast. I looked at Madison sitting in her scarlet dress, with her stolen designer bag waiting for her endless supply of cash to be secured. And finally, I looked at Cameron, the parasitic fraud who thought he had just won the lottery. I brought the microphone to my lips. A heavy, absolute silence fell over the ballroom. "Thank you, Dad," I said. My voice was incredibly calm, carrying none of the nervous hesitation they expected. The audio system projected my words perfectly across the room. "Your speech about family loyalty and strategic partnerships was truly moving. It is fascinating how much emphasis you put on trust." David's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. He recognized the shift in my tone. It was not the voice of the obedient, eager-to-please daughter. It was the voice I used in deposition rooms when I was about to dismantle a corrupt executive. "You have asked me to stand here tonight and publicly commit to securing a $2 million future for this family." I continued, my gaze sweeping across the room of investors. "You want me to invest my life, my reputation, and my assets into the foundation of this marriage and your company." I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle over the 50 executives watching my every move. I turned my head slightly, locking eyes with Kendrick. He sat perfectly still, his dark eyes burning with anticipation. Well, I smiled, a sharp glacial expression that caused the temperature in the room to plummet. "I have a gift worth substantially more than $2 million for my wonderful husband and my little sister." I kept my eyes locked on my father as I reached into the hidden pocket of my emerald gown. My fingers found the smooth, cold surface of my smartphone. I had already synced the device to the French restaurant's master audiovisual system during a supposed trip to the restroom earlier that evening. With a single deliberate swipe of my thumb, I bypassed the lock screen. With one firm tap, I initiated the media broadcast. The transition was instantaneous and absolutely flawless. The ambient classical music playing softly through the ballroom speakers cut out abruptly. The crystal chandeliers overhead dimmed to a dramatic cinematic low. Behind the head table, a massive motorized projection screen began a smooth descent from the vaulted ceiling. David looked over his shoulder, his confident smile faltering into a mask of sudden rigid confusion. He thought I had prepared a corporate slideshow. He thought I was about to display the financial guarantees for his $2 million commercial loan. Instead, the screen flared to life with pristine, high-definition drone footage. The video did not start with wedding vows or romantic montages. It opened immediately on the shadowy, intimate balcony of my master bridal suite. Because Leo had used state-of-the-art equipment, the picture quality was staggering. Every detail was magnified to monstrous proportions on the 20-foot screen. There was Cameron, my newly minted husband. His tuxedo jacket discarded, his hands aggressively tangled in the hair of my younger sister. And there was Madison wearing her custom scarlet bridesmaid dress, pressing her entire body against him with a hungry, desperate familiarity. They were kissing. Not a brief drunken mistake, but a deep, consuming embrace that spoke of months of hidden hotel rooms and stolen afternoons. A collective physical shockwave ripped through the ballroom. The silence that followed was absolute and deafening. 50 of Chicago's most elite corporate investors, regional banking executives, and high society figures sat completely paralyzed in their velvet chairs. The clinking of silverware vanished. The waiters froze mid-step. The only sound echoing through the cavernous, opulent room came from the surround sound speakers. The premium directional microphone captured the heavy, unmistakable breathing and soft moans of my husband and my sister, defiling my wedding night. Cameron stood frozen at the head table. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. His jaw went completely slack. The expensive crystal wine glass he had been holding slipped from his paralyzed fingers. It hit the edge of the table and shattered violently. Dark red wine exploded across the pristine white tablecloth, spreading outward like a massive bloodstain. He did not yell. The speakers broadcast his voice with terrifying clarity, booming off the crystal chandeliers and raining down on the very investors he had invited tonight. "Just endure that dry, boring brat for 2 years," my father's voice echoed through the dining room. "Wait until she uses that flawless credit score of hers to guarantee the $2 million loan for our company. Once her trust fund matures, you and Madison can officially be together. Just keep using her money until then." I watched the senior vice president of the regional bank sitting at table number 1, the man who had been considering financing my father's expansion. The executive physically recoiled, his face contorting in absolute disgust. He reached into his tailored suit, pulled out his smartphone, and immediately began typing an urgent message, undoubtedly instructing his risk management team to sever all ties with David's firm. The video continued without mercy. My mother stepped into the frame on screen. "Be careful with Kendrick." Brenda's recorded voice hissed through the speakers laced with cold calculation. "Do not let him get suspicious. We need his surgeon's salary as a backup plan." The camera panned across the head table in real time. My mother was gripping the edge of the tablecloth, her knuckles white, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly as she struggled to pull oxygen into her lungs. My father looked like he was having a cardiac event. He gripped his chest, his eyes darting frantically toward the tables of investors. He was watching his entire logistics empire, his social standing, and his fraudulent legacy vaporize in the span of 60 seconds. He had gathered his creditors to prove his stability, and instead he had just broadcast a high-definition confession of his own premeditated financial and moral bankruptcy. Madison was still sobbing hysterically, sinking to her knees in her expensive scarlet gown, hiding her face from the 50 pairs of eyes burning holes into her skin. Cameron was hyperventilating, staring blankly at the wine-soaked tablecloth, realizing his endless fountain of cash and his entire professional reputation were permanently gone. Through it all, I stood perfectly still at the center of the head table. I did not drop my microphone. I did not shed a single tear. I maintained a sharp glacial posture, watching the digital numbers of their lives hit absolute zero. I had audited their deception, mapped their vulnerabilities, and triggered the collapse of their fraudulent enterprise. The stage was now completely decimated, and the audience was waiting for the final verdict. I kept my eyes locked on my father as I reached into the hidden pocket of my emerald gown. My fingers found the smooth, cold surface of my smartphone. I had already synced the device to the French restaurant's master audio-visual system during a supposed trip to the restroom earlier that evening. With a single deliberate swipe of my thumb, I bypassed the lock screen. With one firm tap, I initiated the media broadcast. The transition was instantaneous and absolutely flawless. The ambient classical music playing softly through the ballroom speakers cut out abruptly. The crystal chandeliers overhead dimmed to a dramatic cinematic low. Behind the head table, a massive motorized projection screen began a smooth descent from the vaulted ceiling. David looked over his shoulder, his confident smile faltering into a mask of sudden rigid confusion. He thought I had prepared a corporate slideshow. He thought I was about to display the financial guarantees for his $2 million commercial loan. Instead, the screen flared to life with pristine high-definition drone footage. The video did not start with wedding vows or romantic montages. It opened immediately on the shadowy, intimate balcony of my master bridal suite. Because Leo had used state-of-the-art equipment, the picture quality was staggering. Every detail was magnified to monstrous proportions on the 20-foot screen. There was Cameron, my newly minted husband, his tuxedo jacket discarded, his hands aggressively tangled in the hair of my younger sister. And there was Madison, wearing her custom scarlet bridesmaid dress, pressing her entire body against him with a hungry, desperate familiarity. They were kissing. Not a brief drunken mistake, but a deep, consuming embrace that spoke of months of hidden hotel rooms and stolen afternoons. A collective physical shockwave ripped through the ballroom. The silence that followed was absolute and deafening. 50 of Chicago's most elite corporate investors, regional banking executives, and high society figures sat completely paralyzed in their velvet chairs. The clinking of silverware vanished. The waiters froze mid-step. The only sound echoing through the cavernous, opulent room came from the surround sound speakers. The premium directional microphone captured the heavy, unmistakable breathing and soft moans of my husband and my sister defiling my wedding night. Cameron stood frozen at the head table. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. His jaw went completely slack. The expensive crystal wine glass he had been holding slipped from his paralyzed fingers. It hit the edge of the table and shattered violently. Dark red wine exploded across the pristine white tablecloth, spreading outward like a massive bloodstain. He did not even flinch at the sound of the breaking glass. He just stared at the giant screen, his arrogant, parasitic facade utterly destroyed. The speakers broadcast his voice with terrifying clarity, booming off the crystal chandeliers and raining down on the very investors he had invited tonight. "Just endure that dry, boring brat for 2 years," my father's voice echoed through the dining room. "Wait until she uses that flawless credit score of hers to guarantee the $2 million loan for our company. Once her trust fund matures, you and Madison can officially be together. Just keep using her money until then." I watched the senior vice president of the regional bank sitting at table number 1, the man who had been considering financing my father's expansion. The executive physically recoiled, his face contorting in absolute disgust. He reached into his tailored suit, pulled out his smartphone, and immediately began typing an urgent message, undoubtedly instructing his risk management team to sever all ties with David's firm. The video continued without mercy. My mother stepped into the frame on screen. "Be careful with Kendrick." Brenda's recorded voice hissed through the speakers, laced with cold calculation. "Do not let him get suspicious. We need his surgeon's salary as a backup plan." The camera panned across the head table in real time. My mother was gripping the edge of the tablecloth, her knuckles white, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly as she struggled to pull oxygen into her lungs. My father looked like he was having a cardiac event. He gripped his chest, his eyes darting frantically toward the tables of investors. He was watching his entire logistics empire, his social standing, and his fraudulent legacy vaporize in the span of 60 seconds. He had gathered his creditors to prove his stability, and instead, he had just broadcast a high-definition confession of his own premeditated financial and moral bankruptcy. Madison was still sobbing hysterically, sinking to her knees in her expensive scarlet gown, hiding her face from the 50 pairs of eyes burning holes into her skin. Cameron was hyperventilating, staring blankly at the wine-soaked tablecloth, realizing his endless fountain of cash and his entire professional reputation were permanently gone. Through it all, I stood perfectly still at the center of the head table. I did not drop my microphone. I did not shed a single tear. I maintained a sharp, glacial posture, watching the digital numbers of their lives hit absolute zero. I had audited their deception, mapped their vulnerabilities, and triggered the collapse of their fraudulent enterprise. The stage was now completely decimated, and the audience was waiting for the final verdict. The massive projector screen slowly rolled back into the ceiling, but the devastating images were already permanently burned into the minds of every single person in the ballroom. The horrific silence stretched for another grueling 5 seconds. Then my mother broke. Brenda scrambled to her feet, her chair scraping violently against the polished hardwood floor. She held her hands up in a desperate, pathetic gesture of surrender, attempting a damage control operation that was doomed before she even opened her mouth. "Please, everyone, please, just sit down," Brenda pleaded. Her voice was shrill, echoing with absolute panic. "It is not what it looks like. It was just the alcohol. It was the stress of the wedding planning. Cameron had too much champagne and made a terrible drunken mistake. It means nothing. We are a solid family. David's company is perfectly stable." She looked frantically toward the tables of banking executives, her eyes wide with begging desperation. She was actively trying to sweep a premeditated affair and a coordinated financial conspiracy under the rug of temporary intoxication. She thought the elite circles of Chicago corporate finance would simply overlook a gross moral and financial liability if she smiled hard enough. That was when Kendrick moved. He did not shout. He did not rush. He stood up from his chair with the slow, terrifying, calculated precision of an apex predator locking onto a wounded animal. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its collective breath as the towering orthopedic surgeon bypassed his hysterical wife and walked directly toward the center of the head table where Cameron was still frozen in shock. Kendrick reached into the inside pocket of his perfectly tailored midnight blue suit jacket. He did not pull out a weapon, but what he held was infinitely more lethal. He extracted a thick, sealed white envelope bearing the official, unmistakable crest of his hospital's genetics laboratory. He stopped exactly 1 foot in front of my fraudulent husband. The height and breadth difference between the two men was staggering. Cameron looked like a terrified child staring up at an executioner. "A drunken mistake," Kendrick repeated. His baritone voice was deadly quiet, yet it carried an acoustic weight that commanded the absolute attention of every single investor in the room. He did not break eye contact with Cameron. Kendrick raised his right hand and slammed the heavy envelope directly into the center of Cameron's chest. The sharp smack of the thick paper against the tuxedo jacket echoed like a gunshot. Cameron fumbled instinctively, grabbing the envelope before it hit the floor. "Were you drunk enough to create the 1-year-old child I have been raising for you?" Kendrick asked. The words were delivered with a cold, surgical precision. Kendrick did not blink. He just stared down at the man who had bartered his own flesh and blood to escape a gambling debt. "Rate it." Cameron Kendrick commanded, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper that somehow filled the entire silent ballroom. "It is a certified court-admissible DNA paternity test with a hospital seal. It proves that the son I wake up to feed at 2 in the morning, the son I bought a house for, the son your pathetic, greedy mistress claimed was mine actually belongs to you. You sold your own child to clear your debts." The ballroom literally exploded. The collective gasp of 50 high-net-worth individuals was deafening. This was no longer just a scandal about a cheating husband. This was a multi-layered sociopathic conspiracy involving paternity fraud, child abandonment, and severe financial manipulation. The senior vice president of the regional bank, The exact man my father desperately needed to secure his $2 million expansion loan stood up so fast his chair tipped over backward. He threw his silk napkin onto the table in absolute unfiltered disgust. David, you are completely out of your mind if you think my institution will ever do business with a family of sociopaths. The banking executive announced loudly, not caring who heard him. Your credit line is effectively terminated. Do not ever contact my office again. He turned on his heel and marched toward the exit. It was the ultimate domino falling. Within seconds, the rest of the corporate investors followed suit. They stood up in a wave, grabbing their coats and abandoning their expensive caviar. The sheer revulsion on their faces was palpable. No legitimate business entity would ever associate with a CEO who orchestrated the financial ruin of his own daughter and facilitated paternity fraud against his own son-in-law. My father stood at the head table, clutching his chest, watching his entire logistics empire, his social standing, and his generational wealth evaporate into thin air in under 2 minutes. Madison was still on the floor, weeping hysterically, clutching the hem of Kendrick's suit pants. Kendrick looked down at her with an expression of absolute freezing apathy. He gently but firmly pried her fingers off his trousers, stepping back as if she were a contagious disease. My lawyer will serve you with the divorce papers tomorrow morning, Kendrick stated, looking down at the woman who had ruined his life. You will not get a single dime of alimony. You will take the credit card debt you racked up. You will take the biological father of your child. And you will never step foot in my house again. Cameron finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. The reality of his complete destruction hit him. The banking executives were gone. The money was gone. Madison was exposed. He dropped the DNA envelope and turned to me. His eyes were wide, frantic, and filled with a pathetic, desperate plea for mercy. "Sydney, please," Cameron begged, taking a step toward me with his hands outstretched. "You have to listen to me. They manipulated me. Your parents pressured me into this. I never wanted to hurt you. We can fix this. I am your husband. We signed a contract." I looked at the sweating, trembling coward standing in front of me. I reached down and picked up my leather briefcase resting beside my chair. I unclasped the metal latches with a sharp, satisfying click. I pulled out a thick stack of legal documents and slapped them down hard onto the white tablecloth right in front of his face. "We did sign a contract, Cameron," I replied, my voice steady, sharp, and totally devoid of empathy. "It is called a post-nuptial agreement. The one you signed 3 days ago when you were terrified the IRS was going to freeze your real estate commissions." Cameron stared at the documents, his breath hitching. "You were in such a rush to protect yourself from my supposed financial liabilities that you did not bother to read the termination clauses I explained, delivering the final fatal blow to his non-existent wealth. By signing that document, you legally and permanently waived all rights to spousal support. You waived all claims to my current assets, my real estate, my investment portfolios, and my grandfather's trust fund. You literally disinherited yourself." I picked up the top document, the freshly filed petition for divorce, and shoved it directly against his chest, forcing him to take it. "You are leaving this marriage with absolutely empty hands," I stated. "You will walk out of this restaurant with nothing but the clothes on your back, your massive gambling debts, and a bastard child you cannot afford to feed." I turned my attention away from my former husband and locked eyes with my parents. David and Brenda were clinging to each other, their faces pale, their entire world reduced to ashes. The opulent ballroom was almost entirely empty now, save for the confused catering staff and my ruined family. "And Mom, Dad," I said, raising my voice just enough to ensure the finality of my words pierced through their shock. "I am a forensic accountant. You truly thought you could use my professional credentials to guarantee your fraudulent loans while secretly laundering stolen corporate cash through Madison's bank accounts." David's knees buckled slightly. He gripped the edge of the table to keep from collapsing. "I spent the last 48 hours compiling every single wire transfer, every fake invoice, and every piece of evidence proving your massive corporate embezzlement," I announced. I packaged it all into a highly detailed report. That tax fraud file was sitting on the desk of the Internal Revenue Service at 8 o'clock this morning. The federal agents will likely be at your corporate headquarters by tomorrow afternoon to seize your assets. I picked up my evening clutch and smoothed the front of my emerald gown. I looked at the four people who had tried to sell my life for parts. Happy bankruptcy, I said softly. I turned my back on the wreckage. I did not look back at my mother sobbing, or my father gasping for air, or Cameron staring at his worthless divorce papers. I walked down the center aisle of the ballroom, my heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor. Kendrick fell into step beside me, his head held high, his dignity fully restored. We walked out of the restaurant and stepped into the cool, refreshing night air of Chicago, leaving the burning remains of their deceitful empire far behind us. The fallout arrived with the precise mechanical certainty of a federal indictment. When you hand the Internal Revenue Service a fully documented, perfectly indexed portfolio of corporate embezzlement and tax evasion, they do not hesitate. Less than 48 hours after I walked out of that French restaurant, the federal agents descended upon my father's logistics headquarters. I did not have to be there to know exactly how it happened, because it made the local Chicago evening news. Convoys of dark sport utility vehicles blocked the loading docks. Agents in tactical windbreakers carried out dozens of cardboard boxes filled with the exact financial ledgers I had already audited for them. David and Brenda woke up to find their entire world seized. The federal government immediately froze all of their corporate and personal bank accounts. The heavily mortgaged suburban estate, the grand house with the towering columns where they had mocked my career, was placed under immediate foreclosure proceedings. They attempted to reach out to the banking executives and high society friends they had hosted at the anniversary dinner. Every single phone call went straight to voicemail. Their country club membership was quietly but swiftly revoked. The elite circles of Chicago possess a ruthless immune system. The moment a member is infected with federal fraud charges and a public paternity scandal, they are surgically cut off. My parents were left with absolutely nothing, ostracized and facing potential prison sentences for wire fraud and tax evasion. Cameron's destruction was equally absolute. My post-nuptial agreement held up in family court with zero friction. He tried to contest it, claiming he signed under duress, but the judge laughed him out of the courtroom. The judge noted that a licensed real estate broker signing a legal contract without reading it was a personal failure, not a legal defense. But Cameron did not remain a licensed broker for long. Once the news of his involvement in my father's financial conspiracy and the paternity fraud went public, the State Real Estate Commission initiated a disciplinary review. They permanently revoked his broker license, citing gross moral turpitude and financial instability. Without his license, without my bank accounts, and without his pristine corporate facade, Cameron was finally forced to face the monsters he had been running from. The massive gambling debts he had accumulated at illegal underground tables could no longer be ignored. There was no dry, boring accountant left to bail him out. The loan sharks he owed money to did not care about his sob stories. They started hunting him. He was a man constantly looking over his shoulder, jumping at every shadow, terrified of the men coming to collect the cash he simply did not have. Madison experienced the most violent crash into reality. Kendrick moved with the swift, unforgiving force of a betrayed surgeon. He legally evicted her from his home the morning after the anniversary party because she had committed egregious marital fraud, and because all the credit cards were solely in his name, he legally severed her financial access entirely. The designer handbags, the luxury spa days, the endless online shopping sprees were completely annihilated. She was forced to pack her belongings into trash bags and drag Cameron and their biological child to a cheap, decaying motel on the far industrial outskirts of the city. The peeling wallpaper and the stained carpets were a far cry from the bridal suites and luxury boutiques she was accustomed to. She was trapped in a squalid, cramped room with a disgraced, unemployed man who was actively hiding from violent debt collectors. The parasitic alliance they had formed to destroy me completely imploded under the weight of actual poverty. Without my money to cushion their lives, Cameron and Madison viciously turned on each other. From what I heard through the legal grapevine, the motel management had to call the local police on them multiple times due to their violent screaming matches. Madison blamed Cameron for failing to secure my trust fund. Cameron blamed Madison for not seducing Kendrick effectively enough to keep her comfortable lifestyle intact. They were two starving wolves locked in a cage, tearing each other to pieces over the scraps of a failed conspiracy. The legal system continued to crush them with a slow, grinding pressure. Kendrick filed for full legal custody of the 1-year-old boy. Despite the child not being biologically his, Kendrick proved to the court that he was the only stable providing father figure the boy had ever known. He presented the motel police reports Cameron's revoked real estate license and Madison's complete lack of income or stable housing. The family court judge took one look at the absolute disaster of their lives and granted Kendrick primary custody. Madison was granted supervised visitation rights, a humiliating condition that required her to sit in a sterile government facility just to see the son she had used as a financial pawn. She was ordered to pay child support based on minimum wage calculations, a debt that would slowly but surely accumulate and haunt her for the rest of her life. Meanwhile, the federal prosecutors officially indicted David and Brenda. The evidence I provided was so comprehensive that their defense attorneys advised them to seek a plea deal immediately. There was no grand trial. There was no dramatic courtroom defense. My father, the man who had ordered me to endure a cheating husband to save his logistics empire, was forced to stand before a federal judge and admit to massive corporate fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. He was stripped of his bespoke suits and his arrogant posture reduced to a trembling, broken man facing the severe reality of federal prison time. Brenda stood beside him, her cosmetic enhancements looking harsh and unnatural under the fluorescent courtroom lights, weeping as the judge handed down their sentences. They lost their liberty, their legacy, and their dignity. The universe has a remarkable way of balancing the scales when you apply the right amount of pressure. They had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small, insignificant, and utterly dependent on their validation. They engineered a psychological prison designed to keep me serving their needs. But the moment I stopped seeking their approval and started treating them like a hostile corporate entity, their entire foundation crumbled into dust. They were not powerful masterminds. They were just greedy, desperate people who made the fatal mistake of handing their financial records to a forensic accountant. The family court judge did not look favorably upon a woman who had weaponized a child to secure a financial sponsor. When Kendrick arrived at his divorce hearing, he did not bring anger. He brought the cold, clinical detachment of a trauma surgeon operating on a shattered limb. He presented the certified DNA results alongside the recovered text messages proving premeditated paternity fraud. The judge was absolutely merciless. Madison attempted to weep for the court. She tried to play the role of the manipulated, overwhelmed young mother, but the digital footprint she left behind painted a picture of pure, calculated extortion. The ruling was a financial slaughter. Because Madison had engaged in egregious marital fraud, the judge explicitly ordered that all joint credit card debt, the mountains of debt she had accumulated buying designer clothes and funding luxury hotel rooms for Cameron, was assigned entirely to her. Kendrick walked away completely free of her financial liabilities. He was legally unburdened from the crushing weight of her reckless spending. But Kendrick did not walk away from the boy. Biology is merely a technicality when compared to the bond forged by waking up at midnight to soothe a crying infant. He loved that child, and he absolutely refused to let the boy suffer for the sins of his biological parents. Kendrick petitioned for and successfully secured permanent legal rights to continue acting as the child's father figure. He established a rock-solid custody and visitation arrangement that guaranteed his presence in the boy's life while simultaneously erecting an impenetrable legal wall between himself and Madison. He cut her off completely. He provided zero spousal support. He allowed zero communication outside of legally mandated childcare logistics, which were handled strictly through a monitored third-party application. Madison was left to drown in her own self-inflicted debt, stripped of the respectable doctor she had tried to trap. About a month after the divorce was finalized, I was sitting in my new downtown office. The dust had settled, and the federal machine was methodically tearing apart my father's logistics company. My personal cell phone rang. The caller identification showed an unknown local number. I answered with my usual professional greeting, expecting a client or a junior auditor. I heard a sharp, ragged intake of breath on the other end of the line. It was Brenda. My mother did not sound like the polished, arrogant matriarch who had critiqued my wardrobe at Sunday dinner. She sounded small, frantic, and entirely broken. The federal agents had officially seized their remaining operational accounts that morning. The reality of federal prison was staring her directly in the face, and her pristine social facade had completely shattered. "Sydney, please," Brenda sobbed into the receiver. Her voice was thick with desperation and panic. "You have to stop this. You have to call the Internal Revenue Service and tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you made a mistake on your report. They took the house, Sydney. They took everything. Your father is having chest pains. You cannot do this to your own family. We are your blood." I listened to the sound of her weeping. A year ago, the sound of my mother crying would have triggered a deep, conditioned panic inside me. I would have scrambled to fix whatever was broken, eager to earn her elusive approval. Now I felt absolutely nothing. The emotional ledger was completely balanced. I recognized her plea for exactly what it was. It was not a mother calling her daughter for comfort. It was a cornered criminal begging a witness to commit perjury. She actually believed that a federal investigation could simply be canceled with a phone call, completely oblivious to how the legal system operated. "Mom," I said, my voice perfectly steady and utterly devoid of warmth, "you do not seem to understand the mechanics of a federal audit. You cannot simply withdraw a fraud report once the government has access to your bank records. The evidence I provided was undeniable. You and Dad embezzled millions of dollars to fund a lifestyle you could not afford, and you planned to use my financial identity as a human shield when the consequences arrived." "We are your parents," Brenda wailed, her tone shifting rapidly from begging to a frantic, hysterical anger. "We gave you life. We raised you. You owe us. You cannot send your own flesh and blood to prison over money. It is just money, Sydney. We are family. Blood is thicker than water." The sheer hypocrisy of her statement solidified my resolve. They had treated me like a disposable asset for my entire life, and now they wanted to invoke the sanctity of family. They had manipulated me, belittled me, and orchestrated a marriage designed to bankrupt me. "You sold me to pay your debts," I stated clearly, ensuring she heard every single syllable. "You brokered my marriage to a degenerate gambler and planned to steal my trust fund to cover your own financial incompetence. You did not treat me like a daughter. You treated me like a line item on a balance sheet. As an accountant, I just settled that invoice. Your account is closed." I did not wait for her response. I did not want to hear another excuse, another lie, or another desperate manipulation. I pulled the phone away from my ear and ended the call. The silence in my office was immediate and incredibly peaceful. I opened my web browser and logged into my cellular provider's portal. I navigated to the account settings and requested an immediate phone number change. I did not want to block her number. Blocking leaves the door existing just temporarily locked. Changing my number burned the entire building to the ground. Within 10 minutes, the digital tether to my toxic lineage was permanently severed. They had no way to reach me, no way to manipulate me, and no way to infect my future. I placed my phone face down on the desk, exhaled a slow, cleansing breath, and turned my attention back to my work. 6 months have passed since the day I completely severed the infected roots of my family tree. I am standing in the center of my new penthouse apartment, high above the bustling streets of downtown Chicago. The floor-to-ceiling windows offer an unobstructed panoramic view of the city skyline. The sunset paints the glass skyscrapers in brilliant shades of gold and amber. The space is completely silent, save for the soft hum of the central heating. There is no manufactured drama here. There are no passive-aggressive comments about my wardrobe or my career. There is only absolute, unadulterated peace, the kind of peace that can only be purchased with hard-earned independence and a ruthless adherence to the truth. The furniture in my home is sleek modern and entirely mine. Not a single item was purchased to impress fake country club friends or maintain a desperate illusion of wealth. I bought this penthouse with my own clean, legally acquired money. My grandfather's trust fund has officially matured, resting securely in an insulated high-yield portfolio, but I barely need to touch it. Yesterday afternoon, the senior partners at my financial firm called me into the executive boardroom. They did not want to assign me a new corporate fraud case. They wanted to officially promote me to the position of Director of Forensic Accounting. The promotion came with a massive compensation package, executive stock options, and unparalleled authority within the corporation. My meticulous attention to detail, the exact trait my mother used to mock as a personality defect, had elevated me to the highest tier of my profession. I did not need a fraudulent, gambling-addicted husband to secure my future. I built my own empire brick by brick, spreadsheet by spreadsheet. My personal smartphone vibrates on the sleek marble kitchen island, breaking the quiet stillness of the apartment. I walk over and glance at the screen. It is a completely new device attached to my new, uncompromised phone number. Only a handful of trusted people possess this contact information. The name glowing on the digital display belongs to one of them. It is Kendrick. I swipe to answer the call, a genuine smile forming on my face. Kendrick sounds incredibly different now. The heavy, suffocating exhaustion that used to weigh down every syllable he spoke has completely vanished. His voice is vibrant, commanding, and filled with the deep resonance of a man who has successfully reclaimed his own destiny. "Sydney," he says, skipping the standard greetings. "I have excellent news, and you are the very first person I am calling." I lean against the cool marble counter, opening a bottle of vintage red wine and pouring myself a glass. "Tell me everything," I reply. The hospital board held their final administrative vote this morning. Kendrick announces, the pride radiating clearly through the cellular connection. They officially named me the new chief of orthopedic surgery. I take over the entire department on Monday morning. I raise my wine glass to the empty room in a silent, celebratory toast. "That is absolutely brilliant, Kendrick. You earned every single piece of that title. You outworked every surgeon in that building." He lets out a rich, genuine laugh. It feels surreal. No more hiding my accomplishments. No more shrinking myself to make ignorant people feel comfortable. And speaking of comfortable, we need to celebrate. I want to take you to that new French restaurant downtown tonight, the one with the impossible waiting list. Consider it a joint celebration for the new director and the new chief of surgery. I accept his invitation without a second thought. We agree on a reservation time and I end the call. We are not bound by trauma anymore. We are two highly successful professionals who survived a sinking ship and built our own respective lifeboats. Kendrick is thriving. He is raising a bright, happy little boy in a peaceful home, entirely free from Madison's toxic vanity and my family's relentless prejudice. David once sat at a dinner table and mocked Kendrick for saving lives at a public hospital, demanding he learn to play with the big boys. Today, Kendrick is the biggest boy in the room, commanding a massive medical department, while David sits in a federal holding cell waiting for his mandated meal tray. I set the phone down next to my wine glass. I walk back toward the expansive glass windows and look down at the city below. The tiny, glowing headlights of thousands of cars move in perfect organized streams. The world operates on logic. It operates on cause and effect. For 33 years, I allowed my parents to convince me that I was fundamentally flawed. I allowed them to dictate my worth based on their shallow materialistic metrics. They viewed my analytical mind as a weakness they could easily exploit. They assumed that a woman who spent her life surrounded by data and tax codes would never have the spine to defend herself against the people who shared her blood. They truly believed I was blind to their manipulation. They made a catastrophic miscalculation. I take a slow sip of my wine, letting the quiet luxury of my new life wash over me. I am exactly who they said I was. I am cold. I am analytical. I am obsessed with the balance sheet. My family called me a dry, boring person who only knew how to look at numbers. But they forgot one crucial, undeniable fact. Numbers never lie, and a forensic accountant never forgives. The most profound lesson we can take from this story is that your worth is never determined by the people who are blind to it. For years, Sydney was conditioned to believe she was inadequate, boring, and only valuable for her financial stability. Society often teaches us that family is an unbreakable bond and that we must endure disrespect for the sake of loyalty. However, this narrative powerfully shatters that toxic illusion. Blood relations do not give anyone a free pass to exploit, manipulate, or abuse you. When the people who are supposed to protect you become the very architects of your destruction, the most courageous thing you can do is walk away. Loyalty should never cost you your dignity or your hard-earned future. Furthermore, the story highlights the absolute power of maintaining your composure and relying on undeniable facts. When faced with catastrophic betrayal, reacting with blind rage or emotional outbursts only gives your abusers more ammunition. By channeling her grief into cold, calculated strategy, Sydney turned her supposed weakness into her greatest weapon. She proved that success, independence, and strict boundaries are the ultimate forms of justice. You do not need to seek loud, messy vengeance. You simply need to build your own fortress, secure your assets, and let the cold, hard truth dismantle their lies. Ultimately, true freedom begins the exact moment you stop seeking validation from toxic individuals. You are the sole author of your life. When you finally close the accounts on those who drain your spirit, you make room for genuine peace and extraordinary success. If you have ever had to set firm boundaries or cut ties with toxic people to protect your peace, share your story in the comments below and subscribe for more empowering journeys of taking back control.